You're listening to the Goggler Podcast. Bahir and Uma with you. Today we are going to be reviewing a brand new film on Netflix called Society of the Snow. This one is directed by J.A. Bayona, who, of course, was responsible for The Orphanage, The Impossible, A Monster Calls, also Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
I keep forgetting he did that.
My favorite of his movies is still A Monster Calls. I saw that many times in the cinema. I cried every single time. I was also impressed at The Impossible because the trailer did not make me want to watch that movie. That movie was about the tsunami, the Asian tsunami, and it was actually executed very well. Based on that, I think it's safe to say that J.A. Bayona has an approach to disaster movies that is very respectful. I can't think of a better person to take on this story. So this movie tells the story of the Uruguayan 1972 Andes flight disaster where a team of rugby players, along with some civilians, were in a plane crash in the Andes and they were left to their own devices for 75 days. The most known part of the story is the part about how they had to eat their dead in order to survive. This was, of course, brought to film a couple of times, the most famous one being Frank Marshall's Alive. And a lot of people may be aware of that movie. And it's a good movie, but I think Society of the Snow might be one of the best disaster movies I have ever seen. The way J. Bayona not only depicts the crash, and we'll talk about that, but also the care and respect he puts into telling this story and not sensationalizing bits that are so easy to sensationalize. He deals with it in such a careful, beautiful way that I don't think I've seen anyone deal with it in this manner or deal with those kind of situations in this manner. By the time you finish this movie, you're spent, you're worn out. But at the same time, there is a sense of real feeling for what these people had gone through.
There's a real sort of respect at what these people achieved. At the end of it, it was almost like having seen Invictus, where they win at the end. There's this big championship thing, right?
But even then, in something like Invictus, there is glory. In something like this, there is still just pain for what is to come.
Just jumping ahead, there was a really great decision from Bayona to not just end the film at their saving. There's a short sort of epilogue to what happens to these guys afterwards in the immediate aftermath of having been found and having been saved. So even at their winning, in air quotes, even at their saving, it's still not over. They still have to essentially live with what has happened in those 70 plus days. The movie really sort of leaves you with two feelings. This idea of what humanity can achieve when pushed to its breaking point, to its nth degree, that yes, you can survive in harsh situations. Yes, you can help each other. Yes, you can overcome these incredible odds. But at the same time, also what you had to do to get there.
The plane crash is one of the most harrowing things I have seen on screen. It's one of the things I wish I could see on a big screen. Actually, this whole movie, even the framing of the Andes, that glacier, everything is shot absolutely stunningly. And of course, it is a stark contrast to the dangers it actually holds. Avalanches, snowstorms, these people broken, hurt. All the shelter they have is the shell of an aeroplane. Like all of that stuff is beautifully contrasted and shot incredibly well. But that crash, when the plane rips in half, when human beings are crushed by seats and broken by shards of metal, oh my God, I haven't flinched in a long time. Like we were talking about the beekeeper and the brother's son, and bones get broken and fingers get sliced off by like rotating saws, and I didn't flinch. In this one, I was like, oh.
That flinching almost comes from the split second imagery that's on screen, right? When when the seats in the plane sort of accordion towards each other and you see a foot get caught under something. And
Oh my
it's
god.
10 frames, 8 frames on screen, but that image is burned into my mind.
Burned into your mind is correct. I have not been
Yeah.
able to get that
No,
particular image.
that particular shot. And it's very quick.
I don't know what it is. I think there is a fear, like an innate fear in all of us, of hands and extremities getting caught in things.
I think it's because we've all, on some level, have had our extremities caught in things. So,
This is like the extreme version of
yeah, you know the pain of what it feels like when your foot gets accidentally caught under a seat. But to see it happen like that, but also just the way the sound is designed, there's a lot of these sort of different disparate noises coming in and out. It sort of really adds to the disorientating situation that they found themselves in that split second of this plane coming apart.
So the movie is very different to Frank Marshall's adaptation of the story. Frank Marshall's adaptation was very, very good. It was very Hollywood, however, and by being very Hollywood, it was also incredibly secular. What's interesting about Society of the Snow is that there is a religiosity that runs through the entire movie. And I think it's a really interesting one. I'm sure the boys were actually incredibly religious. And what Jay Bayona has done is actually taken this idea of eating your dead to survive and using it as this kind of metaphor for communion. And there's all this imagery that runs through the film.
Yeah.
Even our narrator at one point in a note talks about how giving yourself up for others is the greatest love.
Yes.
There's all of this Catholic imagery and religiosity that runs through the film, which bolsters the story in a new and interesting way based on what we've seen before. And I think that was a very smart decision. It adds a weight to what these boys were going through, especially since some of them refuse to eat the dead, right? They think it's wrong, not just on a criminal, illegal level, but just wrong on a religious level.
But wrong on a human level as well, I think is what they're trying to explain, right? I think for me, there were two bits that sort of beautifully sort of bookmarks that particular conversation. When they were first having a conversation about eating their dead, one of them says, but they can't say no. The dead cannot tell us that they're not okay with this, right? Couple that with a few moments later when, in a real moment of, oddly enough, humanity, and a real sweet moment, they sort of slowly turn to each other and go, I give you permission to eat me if I die. And then everybody on the plane sort of does it, but almost in a half joking sort of way, only because that's the only way you can sort of get through that moment, I guess.
But I also love, and I'm sorry to use this phrase, but Bayona doesn't make a meal of it. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
It is the most sensational part of this story. And yet that is not the most important part of this movie.
Yes, correct.
It's the relationship between these boys that is key. And I think that's something that Alive missed as well. Yes, they were forced to do this horrible, difficult thing to survive. But I think what makes this movie shine is the relationship between those 16 survivors, their interactions, the decisions they've had to make in these difficult situations, the reasoning behind those decisions. We finally get a real insight into what was going through their minds. I mean, there are plenty of books written about this, and you would have had that insight if you had read any of those books. But I think if you've only ever seen films about this story, I think this one is definitive.
The filmmakers recorded more than 100 hours of interviews with the living survivors. So, sure, this many years later, there will be embellishments, there will be inaccuracies, there will be things they don't want to talk about, I'm sure. But the fact that they essentially got it directly from the survivors and not just from one person's point of view from one book, I think that's what's important. I think you're right. There's a real sort of sense of survival in here that isn't dramatized. It isn't romanticized. This isn't just Harrison Ford trying to survive an Alaskan winter. This is a group of people who don't know what they're doing, having to get through this really sort of difficult, it's not even a strong enough word, moment that they found themselves in, right? the relationship between them in surviving this was what the story is about. It isn't to talk about that they ate each other. Like those scenes are few and far between. You almost never see actual pieces of meat being eaten until very late on.
And there are these very small things as well. It's not like they show someone hacking up a human body and putting a steak on the grill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's shown in a way that they probably experienced. You try and hide it in the best way possible because you have to do this crazy thing and you want to pretend like you're not doing it.
And that's the only way you can get through it, right? There was a bit at the end when they were considering, for the first time, probably accepting that they could be saved. One of the survivors turns to the other and goes, "What do we do with these?" You know, and the camera pans and just shows pieces of human bodies, you know, bones and skulls, and a photo was being taken, and a guy sort of quickly grabs a little luggage piece and covers essentially a human body part that they've been chewing on. For me, that doesn't describe a lack of humanity. It doesn't describe a lack of empathy towards what they've done to their fellow friends, but it shows that even after all they've done, they're still, embarrassed is not the word, but they're still troubled by what they've done.
I don't think they will ever not be troubled by what they've done. And I think the movie does a very good job in showing us that. There's so much here. The cinematography is incredible. I think the visual effects in depicting what happened was fantastic. I think Michael Giacchino's score is beautiful. This is Spain's entry for Best International Feature for the Academy Awards that are taking place in March. It's a very strong international lineup. It's already been shortlisted. So I think it's going to be one of the 5 or 6 movies that get nominated for sure. It's just such an outstanding work and such an accomplished work. And the word respectful keeps coming back in whatever conversation I have about Society of the Snow. And I think it's really important because these are individuals that have gone through a tremendous trauma that is in every way lifelong. And in telling this story, they have found someone who I feel understands what they went through. He will never truly get it, but I think after watching this movie, I felt, oh, J.A. Bayona managed to transmit some of that to me. Yeah, when telling these traumatic stories, I think it can go either way, right, in these movies. Sometimes, sure, you feel sad, but you're feeling sad for what is happening on screen. And then when the movie ends, you kind of get up from your seat and move along. And then there are the movies that kind of make you feel sad deep within. And as I was watching this film, there were certain moments, and I don't want to spoil it because they're tremendous moments that you need to experience yourself. And I don't even want to like flag it to you, but there are certain moments which will just hit you on a deep level.
As I was watching it, I kept thinking to myself, nah, I'd have just died. Even if I didn't die in the plane, I'd just be like, nah, fuck it. I'm just going to walk down and just keep walking until I die because I can't deal with this.
Yeah, I don't know how I could manage in that situation. These guys are real heroes. Like, I would not last 24 hours, let alone 75 days.
I mean, hours, I don't know how long I'd last 25 minutes, lah, to be fair. Yeah, I was watching it going like, it's just this idea that you can't do anything, right? The best thing to do is to just sit there and try and survive because it's that thing where people say, if you're in a crash, don't leave the site because if you leave the site, people can't find you. Here, I just be like, fuck it, I have to do something. I'm going to go walk that way.
And it's when they leave the site and they look back and it's all white and they just go, no one can see us.
No one can find you. Yeah.
I can't see the crash. And I was just like, oh my God.
The sheer impossibility of that situation, you know? And just coupled with the fact that you have a radio that then they tell you that, yeah, we're just going to stop searching for now. We'll come back later once the snow sets. You know, you just go like, what the fuck? I'm still here. I cannot. I just, I think these guys really just used up all of their cat's 9 lives because that's something else.
Watch this movie, Society of the Snow. It is absolutely tremendous. It is now streaming on Netflix. Let us know what you think once you've seen it. You know how to reach out. All of our social media feeds are Goggler MY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.